Thanks for joining us today. We've got a great panel set up for you guys to talk about keeping up with security emerging trends. With me, I have Chief Paul Sell, and then I also have Chuck, who works with Sentinel, President, and I know I'm doing a terrible job at announcing the two of you, so please do me a favor, go ahead and announce yourselves and keep me out of the loop on this one. We'll start with you, Paul.
Oh, then I guess me. Hi, my name is Paul Sell. I'm the Chief of Police at Montclair State University. I'm the past president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I've trained and worked around the world in law enforcement with law enforcement leaders, and I'm celebrating my 40th year as an active law enforcement member in the state of New Jersey.
Hi, I'm Chuck Marino. Good to be with you all. I'm CEO of Sentinel Security Solutions and serve as a Senior Strategic Security and Technology Advisor to Convergint Technologies. So it's great to be here today. I'm former Secret Service and also served as a Senior Law Enforcement Advisor to the Secretary of DHS.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate it. My name is Janet Fenner. I am President of Defined Marketing. So with us, what we're going to do today is we're going to discuss about some emerging trends within the security industry, seeing on how they're being developed, what are we seeing in their application, and we may have one more guest joining us momentarily, so we're going to hold out for that in a little while. So starting us off and getting us started, we're going to go ahead and talk about one of the biggest trends that we're seeing emerge and actually grow year over year, which is facial recognition. Facial recognition is something that has had both a positive and a negative effect within our industry. So with that, we're going to go ahead and bring up Paul Sell to talk about how he's seeing facial recognition applications currently in the field that he's in. So Paul, with that, could you go ahead and give us a little bit of insight of what you're seeing as Chief of Police and also as former President of the IACP, globally applications on facial recognition?
Well, I think we have to take it right back to the beginning, right? And the beginning of it is, let's look what we do with facial recognition on a daily basis. It's in our lives every single day, whether we pick up our phones and look at our phones and activate it, whether we're working at a camera, whether we're going into our jobs. Many jobs right now use facial recognition. So I think the comfortability level is there with facial recognition. When we're looking at the law enforcement application of it, some of the things we have to look at is it helps us in a sense where we're able to track suspects. We're able to find missing people. We're able to identify people that we come in contact with much more easier than we ever have. If we're looking at how it's increased and how much better it's gotten, since 2014, it's increased 20 times its effectiveness into 2018. That being said, it is much more convenient for us to track people, to identify people, and it's in our everyday lives. And what we have to think about is how police use it and are we using it correctly? Some of the drawbacks that we see in facial recognition is that it isn't completely accurate when we're looking at certain, especially with people of color and females. We've had some issues with it being inaccurate and varied. But that being said, like all other tools that law enforcement use, it needs to be a tool. It doesn't need to be the end all for identification. And I think that's some of the areas we get a little stopped up at is when we start to look at it as if the person is identified through facial recognition, that it is a definite. I think law enforcement has to remember, and I think we're doing a pretty good job at that right now, that it isn't a definite. We have to do other things in the investigative end of it to ensure that we have the right person. Another piece that we see is since the red light camera issue has happened, and a lot of states have put in red light cameras that identify drivers of vehicles, we've seen a lot of misidentifications. And of course, this has caused a lot of controversy on whether police should or should not be using facial recognition. Another issue groups have brought up is the invasion of privacy and how it is invading a person's privacy for you to be able to watch them where they go and when they're moving around. Yet we know many large cities around the world are using it. If you walk through the streets of London, every one of your moves is tracked and facial recognition is being used. We see smart glass being used around the world, where you're walking into malls with kiosks and looking for directions and you're being monitored by your face, and that is looking for potential threats. I think when we get to the heart of it, is law enforcement wants to use facial recognition to help create safer environments. That's the foundation. There are issues with it right now, but I believe law enforcement is doing a great job in working through those issues to ensure that their communities are safer and that facial recognition is a viable tool for the future, as well as what we're doing right now.
All right, that's excellent. Really well said. I'm going to come back to you, Paul, in a minute to talk about the banning as far as a pro or cons, as far as what everyone's saying. So I'm going to get back to you because you've made some really great points about the police department being able to use it the right way versus what's going on out there as far as the people taking the liberties and facial recognition to really disrupt the privacy of citizens. So let's go to you, Chuck. As far as facial recognition, how are you seeing it being implemented and what applications are you seeing right now for facial recognition?
Yeah, thanks, Jen. I think Paul brought up, obviously, the investigative uses as it relates to law enforcement across the country. You know, in the private sector, you're kind of seeing three buckets in which facial recognition is being advertised. That is the investigative functionality, which is tied to the overall network analytics, typically tied to CCTV systems that would allow really a rapid review of these robust camera systems in the event that they needed to be reviewed. And facial recognition, obviously, if you had a description and a picture of a missing child, for example, in a large venue, could aid in the search and going through this cumbersome review of what would normally be just a lot of security camera systems to have to review in a shorter period of time. Also, the other thing is access control. In the private sector as we shift, especially in COVID, to more frictionless access systems and more of an opt-in system of granting access and also deniability to certain individuals from accessing a venue or a specific location. And then the third bucket, which is actually, believe it or not, the more controversial of the three, is the marketing use of facial recognition. And that is the pattern behavior of guests, fans, employees in terms of moving about a location and how do they act each and every day, to where you can use facial recognition to almost drive behaviors in predictive analysis. So those are the three buckets. What I see in the private sector space is that there is a greater acceptability whenever you use a technology like facial recognition and tie it to the overall safety and security of individuals. There's actually a lot more pushback in terms of using this information related to privacy as it relates to marketing purposes.
And you're right, marketing does have a lot to do with it, as far as there's a lot of retail companies that definitely use the demographics behind it as well, as far as facial recognition now has the ability to basically say what age group you're in and distinguish female between male. Not completely accurate the way Paul just described prior, but definitely use it in a marketing sense. And I know that every single security company, if you can use your cameras or your equipment for more than just security, it's a home run, because you get more budgets towards your security, because now you're using it as a marketing tool where stadiums are capable of saying, hey, we've gotten this much demographic, how do we use it as sponsorship? Or retail locations are able to say, hey, we're getting more female than males. Now they're going to go ahead and switch all of their marketing material to basically really adapt to who their market person would be walking through the store. So that is definitely great applications. And as far as facial recognition as a credential, that right there is a home run. That's where I've seen really a very positive move forward to alleviate a lot of the lines coming in through huge corporate offices through turnstiles. Facial recognition is now showing up as an individual turnstile that it gives you access, kind of like a TSA pre-check does, as opposed to waiting online to get in a rush hour mode, because you have a definite list that you can check on, and it's definitely an opt-in system. Now, as far as mentioning opt-in, this is where, do you think, and Chief, I'm going to go ahead and go to you with this one. As far as the technology being banned, a lot of people don't understand the technology. They're really afraid of it. They think that it's an invasion of privacy. As far as an opt-in, do you think anybody who uses facial recognition should state that it's opt-in, or should it just be a given exist that people just need to be aware of? Do you think it's something that should be banned, should be stated, should be marked?
Well, I have to tell you, Jen, and I think there's no question it should not be banned. The usefulness of it has so many different applications. And to Chuck's point, and he was 100% right, when it's done for safety, it's much more accepted. But I'm going to give a little caveat to that. I think when it's done in the private sector for safety, it's given much more, there's much more openness to it than there is when you're looking at government or law enforcement. And I can go through the different areas we'll be covering today. And each one of them, you see when it's being done by government and or law enforcement, there's always a resistance. We sit here when we put an app on our phone and we click yes, 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 and we're giving outside companies that we know nothing about complete access to our world. And we continue to click. But it seems when it comes into the law enforcement area of it, the government area of it, there's always a resistance. So what I think we need to do is not ban it. I think law enforcement needs to use it smarter. But the marketing is the key. I mean, the key to what we do is we don't market what we do. And so with that comes fear. So instead of banning it, we should go on a campaign to market it. There has to be transparency so people understand how we're using it, why we're using it, and the benefits of that use. And I do believe it'll be more accepted than it is right now. And the other side to that is the technology has to get better. It just has to get better. It is not 100%. Matter of fact, depending on who the person is, it's a lot less than 100%. But we have to recognize that, and we have to be able to tell our people that. And that's one of the pieces. If we just get out there and do enforcement with that technology without truly explaining it, it causes the resistance, it causes the fear. I think that the key to it is a good marketing campaign on a national level, as well as the transparency piece on a law enforcement level and community involvement.
Yeah, no, very well said. All right, so then switching as far as facial recognition as a credential, let's go into the access control portion of it. I know access control has now been one of the biggest trends also happening because of the whole COVID. Everybody doesn't, biometrics is something that nobody wants to do anymore. We're rethinking what we're touching out there. So as far as creating an access control system that is frictionless and contactless, what do you think is happening now in the upswing? How do you think companies are switching over as far as using access control? Do you think it's just a phase that everybody's going into right now, that everything's got to be contactless and until everything gets over and done with? Because you know how we Americans behave. We basically freak out and then all of a sudden we get complacent and we're like, oh, no, that was like so last year. And we go back into the same patterns of behaviors that we used to do. So as far as access control, give me a little insight. And Chuck, we'll start with you as far as how you're seeing companies, they are changing their methods of accessing permission to come into a building.
Yeah, I think if you back up, it's a great question. You have to ask yourself the question why somebody wants to go to frictionless access to begin with. I actually implemented facial recognition access at the first NBA arena when we're building the new Chase Center in San Francisco, which actually we can speak about the other dynamic there where San Francisco became the first city to actually ban facial recognition. The reason why we went to frictionless access there for the team campus was because we didn't want the players and the coaches to have to worry about carrying around a key card or a fab and losing that and then have to constantly keep replacing it. So we actually deployed the frictionless facial recognition system. Again, first time an NBA arena has used it, and it worked out absolutely well. And that's that opt-in example that I gave you where members of the team say, yes, we like this idea, we want to use it, the staff, et cetera. So, but we also had the situation where we looked at facial recognition for network analytic use, but we knew that the city police department, for example, would not be able to benefit from our use of facial recognition. So while it didn't prevent us in the private sector from deploying facial recognition, the city agencies were actually banned from using such and deploying it on their own as well. So, but if you look now at the situation that we're in terms of COVID, I think the overall direction for access control points at airports and other large facilities and venues really has been going in terms of that checkpoint of the future, frictionless experience as you go through. Each and every day, it's amazing to me that we're still using magnetometers, right? For example, at locations, and kind of what direction is that going to go in terms of what are magnetometers going to look like in the future? You know, are they going to actually be embedded in the walls of construction and other choke points? So I think as we look to make the whole experience more frictionless, and that's also from an optical standpoint, where people are being screened without actually having to see and directly experience and pass through the devices that are doing the screening.
Okay, excellent. No, great. So, you know, as far as those are all really good points, as far as like the direction everyone's moving into. Paul, let's go to you now. As far as what are you seeing? I mean, I know that you're chief of police on a big university campus, but how are you seeing access control shift, change, adapt? What are you seeing more uses of? You think that that's a problem on campus or off campus or wherever you're seeing the application? Tell me a little bit about how you're seeing access control, if you're seeing the change at all.
Well, you know, we're starting to see a lot of changes, and I don't know if we're ever going to really go back to where we were. I think once we implement changes that are good for the community's safety, they want to stick with it in one form or another. So I don't think we'll ever see ourselves going back to where we were. You do see facial recognition and frictionless access being done on many areas now. And again, and to Chuck's point, and this is an area law enforcement has to really be aware of. Like he said, this city was unable to use it. And it continues to be that piece. If we're doing it, I'll use a university for an example. If we're doing it at a university and it's to get in and out of buildings and control, it's fine. When you put the tag that it's a police function, there's resistance. And that is the piece that we have to really be aware of as we move forward in it. But I do believe there's a place for it. And I think as we move ahead through COVID and once we get past COVID, I do think the changes are permanent to some degree. I don't think we're going to go back to where we were in a lot of the ways we deal with access control any longer.
Yeah, and to that, Paul, you had brought up a point beforehand regarding the accepting the terms and everything else, as far as like what are you opting into, whether it's on paper or whether it's on an app. As far as a cyber security back end of it, and making sure that you're protected as an individual, you know, I want you to talk a little bit more about that, because you make a good point. You know, here we're so resistant to facial recognition, but yet we use it, you know, some of us use it every single day to get into our phones or on a Ring doorbell or anything that's electronic out there, and we waive our rights to everything. We're the kind of society that now is like, just accept the terms. We don't read through those three, you know, section documents that keep popping up. We just breeze right through it, and we don't know what we're giving access to. This is particularly in cameras that are home security. Most home security cameras that are bought online that are produced in China, you'd be amazed that you're giving away your rights to privacy altogether because you don't read what you're installing. You're just accepting it and moving on because it's the instant gratification that you need. I want it right now. I don't, you know, I'm not going to read all that. I'm just going to accept. But when it comes time to saying, hey, are you okay with facial recognition? People are like, wait, hold on a second. I didn't give approval for that. So it's amazing on how when it comes to security, people are resistant. When it comes to convenience, people are like, hey, we're all about it.
Yeah, there's no question about it, and that's what we're seeing. You know, we're seeing people, you know, identity theft is at an all-time high, and of course, fraud, and it goes right down the whole list of people being taken advantage of. The minute you open your phone, if you've not taken the precautionary steps, which probably 99% of the people opening those phones don't do, you're vulnerable. You're allowing access to every part of your life. You know, no longer is it a criminal that needs to hack into your phone, because companies can do it. And if they get into the companies' websites, and really that's where we have to start looking at third-party cyber risks. That's a huge piece what's going on. A recent study that was just done out of New York Financial showed that 61% of the people surveyed, of the companies surveyed in 2019, as opposed to 45% of the companies surveyed in 2018, have had numerous breaches of security, running anywhere from 4 million for every data breach they've had and higher. And it's not only limited to the big companies that we rely on when we hit our apps on our phone. It's also the small companies. 43% of the small businesses surveyed has had multiple attacks. And so when you start looking at the apps, it's not necessarily what you do also. It's who and where are those apps being vetted? Where are they from? And what are they doing to ensure the safety when you install their app on your phone. And so it's a whole nother issue. So you have to worry about your own safety, but in addition, you have to worry about the safety of the third-party vendor. And that's a big issue right now that's out there. We know the supply chains are being attacked. Cybersecurity needs to be better than it is right now. And overall, if you have a lot to lose, you really have to be very careful, really careful in what you open on your phone and how you act every day, even on your computer. I mean, many people don't realize that it doesn't take much to reverse a camera on your computer and watch you in your home. Reverse the camera and just tap right into your security monitoring systems to watch what's going on in your house. I think people have a false sense of security when they put these devices in their houses, as well as when they use their phone. And I think, Janet, you hit it right on the head. It's convenience. We are so worried about things being convenient. We are giving up security in the process of doing that. And I think we just have to be more aware of what we do and more aware of the companies that we are using to provide those type of apps and other programs that we're using.
You're right. And, I think it all starts with education. I mean, Chuck, I think you can definitely, you're doing consultation globally on security and the risks. If you take a look at education, as far as like not only just educating your employees, but you need to start the education with your children. You know what I mean? Your children need to know what it is that they're downloading on their phones. What are they putting in? What are they giving people access to? So Chuck, you basically, your consultation with security, tell me a little bit about, the tactics that you take to making sure that people are prepared to know what their risks are.
Yeah, it's a great question. Paul hit on a lot of great points as well. There is a big education that takes place here. All of this technology has privacy implications, as you two were just discussing. But where the education takes place is, yeah, all this technology is great. Yeah, it's all fancy. Yes, most of the people that I talk to want it, but it really comes with a lot of required due diligence. You have to understand that as a location, a company, a venue, a stadium, whatever it is, if you're deploying this technology, you basically assume the overall responsibility for all of this data collection that you're taking in, right? So now you're going to get questions like, where is that information stored? Is it stored locally or is it stored in the cloud? If it's stored in the cloud, which cloud vendor are you using? Which company are you using? How long is your retention for? Is it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? What are your cybersecurity procedures and policies that you have in place? What's the notification protocols if you do have a breach? And all this information does get impacted. How are all these people that have passed through your location? I mean, if you think contact tracing during a pandemic is tough, imagine going back to kind of check everybody that's come through one of your locations. So there really is a lot of education that takes place, typically with the general counsels of the companies that I deal with, as well as the security directors. But it is really important, because if you don't address it in the correct way, you open yourself up to further liability. So where you think you're decreasing liability by deploying these technologies, if you don't deploy them right and put the right back of house policies and procedures in place, you increase the potential for greater liability if you have a cyber breach. As far as the education goes about, you brought up children. I have 2 young ones. You're talking about the TikTok conversations and all these 100%. Other apps that are out there. And really, you've got to make sure that, one, there's the exposure to obviously some foreign locations that you don't want to give that exposure to. There's kind of domestically the threat to bad actors using this type of technology. So you want to make sure that, the younger folks as well, all this technology that they now have available to them at the, click of an app to download, that they're not being exploited through that. And unfortunately, it's something that we still see go on. And as mobile devices are becoming, more prevalent and given to children at a younger age for communication, it's very hard for adults to monitor what their activity is. So, as far as the adults, we tell them to, make sure that they're reviewing these devices frequently in terms of their usage.
Okay, no, great points. All right, I'm going to shift it over now to a technology that we're seeing more and more, especially in your fields, is predictive analysis. So as far as that technology goes, I want to know a little bit about how you're seeing this, how you can use it as a proactive tool instead of a reactive tool, and just basically a little bit about the application in the market, or what verticals you're seeing more and more predictive analysis coming into. So Paul, we're going to go ahead and start with you, the analytics on this. Let me hear if you've seen this more. And I also want to know, like, and I'm going to ask you both this, the technology today, based on the technology probably about 2 years ago, even a year ago, tell me about the shift in that and what's really helped investigation or security propel forward. So this whole entire area of the predictive analytics, how do you see that going into play every single day, and how is it helping in the field?
Well, I have to say that when you start looking at predictive analytics, right, you're talking about taking machine learning, data mining, statistics, monitoring, combining them together, to create this algorithm that's going to help you predict what happens. We see it again through our daily lives, and we don't think anything of it. If we're taking a look at retail, right, they start to understand, stores use it to understand how you buy, when you buy, and what you're going to buy. Amazon starts to create products and gives you a recommendation list for you in your personal life. Matter of fact, Amazon's working on programs that are going to have products ready for you to go before you order them, based on the way you ordered, to get them to you even quicker. Entertainment business, right? Netflix has over 100 million subscribers, and they take those predictive analytics and they sit there and they use them to create programming that people want. Pick the weather, and you're looking at global warming and weather patterns. But when it comes to policing, we limit it and we try to use it to forecast criminal behavior. We use a lot of historical data to feed into the equation so that we're able to predict where a crime or a crime area would be, some what we call hotspots and areas that we could use in police mapping to put our resources to ensure some of the crimes that have happened before don't continue to happen. Those who are supportive of it, we look at it and we say, listen, we can use this to really predict what's going to happen. Those who are against it really argue a lot about the Fourth Amendment violations, reasonable suspicion, or unreasonable search and seizure. They believe that some of the issues, that if we're using historical data that may have been biased, that the new technology is bringing that historical biased data in. So of course, the new data will be biased. A lot of the big data companies out there are saying no, they're able to really shift through that and able to come out with products that remove the bias element of it. But in general, it's being used around the country and around the world in major cities. The key is the algorithms have to be colorblind, and there has to be transparency. There's no question about that. When you're looking at crowd controls, and I thought Billy would be great for this with the NFL if he was here. As you're looking for crowd controls, it's being used in a way to show, first, it's being used using the technology for the follow me type technology, where we're able to track a target if they're in a venue. It allows you to track a target and see what that target will be. And in addition to that, it looks at, again, hotspots in big ticket venues. So whether you're looking at concerts, stadiums, and it's been used around the world at major events. Areas that we know gatherings have happened, areas we know where people have been funneled in will be vulnerable if there was an attack there. So they can predict where that's going to be and change how they do business, again, to create a safer community. The problem continues to be the marketing of it and how we as law enforcement and government let the people we protect know why we're using this, how we're using this. And I do believe, and I know, Chuck, you have sat in both seats in the law enforcement end of it as well as in the private sector. I do believe that when it comes from the private sector, it's more easily accepted. And again, the government law enforcement has that push, and that's really on us. It's not on our community members. It is on us to do a better job. And there's an old saying, you don't have to be sick to get better. I think the job we do is good, but it doesn't mean we couldn't do it better.
Sure. Okay. I mean, that's a lot. Chuck, let's go to you. And I'm getting a little bit of feedback. Let's go to you and talk about predictive analytics, where you're seeing it take place. I know Paul had a lot of points on this as far as, I think, Paul, it comes down to communication with the community, communication between every single district, and I'm sorry, Chuck, I'll get right back to you. Every single district or every single area, law enforcement needs to work with their community to communicate and say, listen, this is what we're doing to keep you guys safe. It's not so much on a global level, it's not so much on a national level, it's on a community by community level. This way they know that we're here, we live here, and where we live, this is what we're going to do for you. So it's a matter of taking the campaign locally instead of nationally, so it's really understood from a homegrown kind of point of view. I mean, I know as a citizen, I would feel a lot better knowing that my police force is doing X, Y, and Z and Y, and they're giving me the visibility and they're being completely transparent with me as to how they're doing things. And that old saying that says, if you don't have anything to hide, you shouldn't worry about anything, but that doesn't really hold water, so people are still freaked out. But yet they'll give away everything but a blood sample to get TSA pre-check access, so the convenience. But if we do position it as a communication factor within the community, we may have an advantage of helping the technology move forward in a positive light instead of something that we're looking for everything about. And that's not the case. Like facial recognition, all these analytics that are in place, they're not specifically capturing everything about you. What they're doing is they're seeing what happened, where is it going, why is this happening, how to prevent a situation. It's really helping keep communities safe. So, Chuck, let's have you add a little bit about predictive analytics. How are you seeing it used in the market? How are you seeing that type of technology being moved forward?
Yeah, thanks. And Paul will laugh when I bring this up, but if you look at kind of the prehistoric version of when analytics were first taking place, if you look at a place like New York City with Bill Bratton, right, he used to he'd call it putting cops on the dots. And that was, they would take in all this information, all the reports, and basically where were they seeing the uptick in crime? And that's where he would send, the additional law enforcement to kind of, play a game of whack-a-mole and get the crime under control. So, but Paul's right, it's harder for law enforcement and government agencies to sell these programs because of the big brother effect, right? And what's the government going to ultimately do with this information? So it is more easily deployed in the private sector. I think what the latest trend that you're going to see in the private sector, especially as locations are trying to reopen, whether it's getting people back to work or concerts or games, I think you're going to see population density monitoring really play a significant role, where at a local level, you can kind of, one, keep an eye to make sure that your numbers are not exceeding the CDC recommendations within a specific area of a location, and send specific alerts to those people in those areas that you are in fact violating the CDC recommendations in terms of proximity or amount of people in a specific location. So you will see population density, which will help with contact tracing. As far as the network analytics, and this is really what I love about the network analytics in terms of the prevention piece, is you're talking about object recognition capabilities, and this is all objects. I mean, these network analytics, if you want to be alerted that a suitcase has been left unattended for 15 seconds or 30 seconds, you can set up the network analytics to alert you so you could dispatch a security officer to that item. And take the next steps that are required if it is in fact an unattended package, and you need to have a police dog come over and sweep it to make sure that it's okay. I mean, you always have the responsibility of erring on the side of caution when you have situations like that. We're seeing great increases in concealed weapons detection. Where you're looking at the uses of these technologies on areas like open plazas, before people ever enter a Fortune 500 company or a large venue, where you're kind of starting what I call that soft detection process as people are beginning the process to queue. And it's that soft area that you see in airports, right? If you look, when you go into an airport, you get dropped off at the curb. That's still a soft area where you come through the first doors and go up to the ticket counter. I mean, yeah, you're entering some, through some technologies and through some general observation, but you're really not going through the screening scrutiny that you go through once you encounter TSA further in the airport. So it's all of these predictive technologies that are available to you through your CCTV system, through other technologies in these soft areas where you can really focus in on people that are queuing, doing this pre-screening before they actually enter your venue.
No, you're right. And this is another case that you can actually use these analytics as a marketing piece as well. So you're enhancing your security by knowing, hey, has a VIP entered the area? You can use facial recognition to allocate them. You can definitely take a look at how many people are in queue to say, hey, we need to move and get somebody else on to open another counter to go ahead and disperse to basically enhance the customer experience. I mean, there's so many analytics right now out there that are being used for customer experience enhancement. I'm seeing car dealerships that are putting in license plate recognition. So this way, when the customer pulls up, they know that, hey, Joe's on the show floor who sold him this car. Let's go ahead and get him to come out to greet his customer and make sure that everything's up and running. There's all types of, and now we're seeing hand washing analytics. There's a lot of different analytics that are being built out there based on the neural networks that are now available, and they're more and more advanced as far as being able to create a better experience to disperse crowds, to keep control on a crowd, going to know exactly who's in the building, who's out of the building. Occupancy management is another big thing that's trending right now due to COVID. You have to keep your numbers down. Even in restrooms. So even though customers go into restaurants, you still have a maximum capacity within a restroom, even though you've got people in the restaurant. So there's a lot of different analytics that we're seeing pop up. Every single time I turn around, there's a new analytic in the market, but it's all about vetting it and making sure how does it work and proving to us to say, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with still doing a shootout in today's age at all. You basically vet it, you ask the companies to come in, and you ask them to go ahead and show them your technology based on where you're using it, because that's really what's important. Companies can go out there and say, hey, we've got this analytic, or we've got this technology, it's going to be perfect for yours. Show it. Do a proof of concept. You have to show it in order for it to be used correctly. And then also another thing to pay attention to is the analytics behind it, the reports that you get. Most companies can say, yes, we do this analytic, but as far as the reporting on the back end as to how it performed or what's going on, or doing a monthly report, or even health safety checks where you have to be compliant at old age homes to basically say, we need to know who came in and who, visitors, staff, anything to that effect, temperature check, name. This all has to be put into a report. It's compliance. Everything right now is compliance. And you have to make sure the technology exists, that works, and then it can basically give you the compliance report that you need to attach to it. So that's definitely key. Now, in the last, let me go ahead and ask this, and we're getting close to getting our Q&A. Technology has changed dramatically. If I were to ask, what is one technology that each of you have seen that's really changed and is super useful in what you're doing now today, based on 2 years ago, that you wouldn't say, I would have never thought that I'd be using this in 2 years, or recommending this product, or really looking into this product? What is the one technology that has come a long way? And I'll start with you, Chuck, on this one.
Yeah, the area that has really helped me and my clients is in the mass notification space. One of the things that you want to do when you're kind of building the architecture around security programs and technologies at locations is you don't want multiple technologies that each do their own little thing, right? You want to do as much one-stop shopping as possible in terms of the technologies that you're deploying and what they do. And in the mass notification space, they are doing so much more. I mean, they have the ability to help with contact tracing. It's now, instead of single push, it's now two-way communication. It's geolocation, so that during an emergency, you can actually know who's on the campus or at a venue that for the folks that are working for you, and who's off of campus. And then there's also the whole augmented reality functionality that allows you to get specific locations of people during an emergency. You can see through walls, you can see through smoke if there's a fire. So it's really the mass notification space, from my experience, has really upped their game to a point that I'm very happy to see. Some companies are doing it a lot better than others, but overall, I can tell you that the redundancy in communication, if you have a power outage, for example, through mesh networking to ensure that the communication continues during an emergency, all these functionalities have really increased and are just going to give a great situational awareness to those that need it during a crisis.
That's interesting, the seeing through the wall technology. I've heard a lot more and more about that, and that's emerging. And it's super interesting to be able to keep our first responders safe in certain situations with using technology in that aspect. Paul, what are you seeing right now 2 years ago that you're not, that you're seeing more and more now that is really growing and, forcing its way into the market?
Well, quite honestly, you can tell that Chuck and I didn't speak ahead of time because I would have said, I have about 20 notes here really talking about mass communication. I will not go back over what he said. He was 100% spot on, and especially when you're doing universities or big area events, there's no question about it. That is the #1 change that I think has grown leaps and bounds. But I'll just go on another area, and that is interoperability between law enforcement agencies. I think if you take a look where we've come, and it's almost 20 years from 9/11 to today, we are light years away from where we were in being able to connect with each other through technology, being able to speak in emergencies, being able to get on the same bandwidth and really do a controlled response. Where in the past we didn't have that ability. So I would say mass notifications #1 as far as what I see. #2 would be the interoperability between agencies across the country.
Okay, excellent. Paul, do you want to say anything back to that? I'm sorry, Chuck, do you want to say anything back to that?
Hey, that's okay. No, I mean, imagine, how different the response and communications capabilities would have been back on September 11th if where this technology is today had been there back then. That was one of the main focus points of the 9/11 Commission was the communication and interoperability of law enforcement. And the nice thing is that, now with all this technology, you're able to tie in your local police department, your local fire department to your communications from a private sector entity. So there's nothing that prevents you as a company or a venue from including the local police department on your mass notification system, for example. In many respects, it's saving you from a separate 911 call to the dispatch because they're actually a recipient of the mass notification and can monitor it in the same fashion that you are. Same thing with radio communications. They can go back and forth. Either as a private sector, you can request a police radio or give them one of yours. And the interoperability is super important here to step up the response to situations like an active shooter or medical or fire. So really, the interoperability is only going to continue to get better and better. And that's a credit to those out there in the space that are working on this technology hard each and every day. I think they have a good understanding of what is being requested from experts like Paul, who have large responsibilities, both in law enforcement and for a university. And I think they're matching our expectations. And again, our expectations will increase over time, and they'll be able to match it.
Okay, no, excellent. All right, gentlemen, then that concludes us. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question that the audience has. And I'm going to start with you, Paul, on this question. It's saying, as far as, let's take a look. Facial recognition, how easy it is to implement, and what are the top things to keep in mind? So in that, can you tell me a little bit about that, Paul?
Yeah, the implementation of it is very easy. And I think the technology companies that provide them out there have resources that we can tap into quite quickly if we need it. So it's easy to get it. But to Chuck's point earlier, we need to make sure we vet the companies that we're using and that we get the best system that's available out there. And then it has to constantly be monitored. So, getting the facial recognition, I think, is good for all communities in all different aspects, both private and law enforcement. But again, the key to all of it working is making sure that we vet the organization or the company that we buy it from, and that we continue to monitor what we do, and we don't use, and that would be my one message to anybody using facial recognition, it is not the end all. It is a tool on that tool belt in investigations.
And how about the companies that have not only facial recognition, face mask detection? What are the pitfalls to look out for? I mean, what do people have to keep in mind when it comes to new technology that are emerging in the market? And of course, it's the whole sense of false security, because everything's being shoved down our throats right now because of COVID. This is going to keep you safe. This is going to do it. And face mask detection is an analytic that's actually now being tied to facial recognition.
Well, we know when we're looking at the face masks that that is, they've been having a lot of issues with the accuracy of face masks and facial recognition. And looking at several different studies nationwide, it ranged from 5 to 50% inaccurate, depending on if the mask was up and over the nose and the color of the mask. Dark mask and light mask were weighing in differently for the accuracy number. So I think we have to just be aware, and really to the point of what we spoke about throughout this entire webinar, is we talk about education, whether it's educating our children and educating ourselves. We can't forget that. We have to be educated in any technology we buy. And I will tell you, in any technology we use, the companies that are out there are good. There are great technology companies, and we need them. But I think everybody has to do their due diligence to ensure what they're getting is the best on the market, and it's going to work for the use they need it for.
Absolutely. And take a look at, your every application is different depending on where we're installing. Lighting, height, all of that plays, speed, everything plays a factor in the installation and the working of technology properly. All right, so Chuck, I'm going to come to you with this question. I'm throwing you a curveball on this one. So here's the question from that's been asked. Could you discuss a relationship between regulation and technological developments as it relates to these security topics, given the fact that regulation always lags several years behind? How much influence should the private sector have in shaping these regulations? It's right in there if you want to reread it.
Listen, that is a good question. It's actually one of my pet peeves in this space, in the safety and security and law enforcement space. I think Paul will agree with me, but I'll be very interested in his thoughts and yours, Janet. And that is, historically, if you look at regulations, rules, policies related to public safety, they always lag and are updated only when there is a catastrophic situation. So let's look, we brought up September 11th. Let's look at all the changes that were implemented in the security space following the attacks of September 11th. Let's move to 2009, when we had the attempted bombing of the airline in the United States above Detroit by Abdullah Muttalib. Let's look at the increase in FAMs that resulted from that. Let's look at the increases in cargo screening that resulted from the threats in Yemen around that same time. So everything is in response to an event. It should not be that way. And really, security needs to be kind of proactive in that way. The big challenge with security, be it government or private sector, is always how you're explaining the ROI, the return on investment, right? The return on investment, in at least the way I tell the story, is that these security technologies and policies and procedures, which should be reviewed often and upgraded as needed and adjusted, are tied to the continuity of operations. That can be viewed in the governmental context. That could be tied to a brand or a business, right? So you have brand protection, you have continuity of business. Essentially, security is what allows in the private sector these companies to continue making money, right, from suffering damage to their brands. So it's a very interesting conversation, something that I could probably talk to for a long time because it does bother me. And that's where security should just naturally be an evolution of progressiveness and being proactive as opposed to being incited or caused by a regulation that will likely only come in response to an incident.
Okay, great. Excellent answer. All right, I'm going to go to another question. I'm going to go to you, Paul, on this one. It says, my question is, with frictionless security measures being increasingly sought in the current setting, do you think that the continued blurring of the lines between traditional security system functionality will organically drive innovation to provide solutions that don't need these siloed descriptions, categories? Also furthering this, the possibility for universal security platforms that serve both physical, logical, and as in both of these cyber threats. Sorry, I don't have my glasses on, and this stuff is really small. So, Paul, I don't know if you had a chance to read that one. If you want me to reread that.
I did not have a chance to read that one, but yeah, I think there will be an organic growth there, but I think it's still a ways off. I think we're not there yet, and more needs to be done for us to be able to get to where we need to be. And I think when we're dealing with blurred lines, we continue. You know, at times I believe some of these lines are blurred purposely to keep different factions from bringing it together to create a more proactive and more acceptable solution. So I think we do need to work on getting rid of the blurred lines to definitively identify what we need to do. And then I believe it will organically grow. But I do think it's still a ways away, and almost falling back to Chuck's part. Anytime you connect any of this to a regulatory piece, there is a delay, and it's normally a reactive instead of a proactive approach. So I would like to see it grow. I think we still have a little ways to go, but I like to remain confident, and I'm a half full kind of glass person. So I believe in us. I believe in our business. I believe in the technology business, and I believe in our community members. I think we will get there doing the right thing. I just think it's going to take a little time.
You're right. Anytime any new technology comes out or emerges, it does take the industry a little bit to go ahead and catch up. It's something that, you can't fault it. But the key to it is to stay in front of it and educate yourself on it. So when customers do ask for more than what their system currently does, and they want more, because that's what we're seeing now, customers do want to see more than just their doing surveillance. They want to make sure that their VMS platforms does more. They're ready to bring in the analytic part of it. They're ready to say, hey, what else can I do? What else exists? And for us to be educated on that is definitely the key, because some deal integrators out there, they stay with the mindset of they go with what they know, and that is going to be the death of them, because they have to continue to learn about the technology. And not only just learn about it, they also need to vet it themselves and work with it themselves. The most successful companies are in the position of knowing exactly how the technology works, because they've tested it, they've done lab work on it, not just selling it out of a trunk. So it definitely makes for a different category of service. So let's go to you, Chuck, if you want to add anything to what Paul said on these blurring of the lines.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And one thing, before I forget is, for all the partners that are on this call, I mean, they know what the challenge is when they come to speak to Paul or I or another security director. And the last thing that's going to sell us is, hey, this is just the newest thing and you need to have it, right? It's much more deliberate than that. They know that we want to spend a lot of time with them and really understand, yes, it's a new technology that may be occurring in the space, but what problem does it solve, right? What is it doing better? what is it either doing better than what I currently have, or if I don't have something and they've identified a void in the space, of course I want to hear about that. But then it's also, how do we proceed going forward, right? What's that familiarity and that vetting, if you will, that comfort level of how it's going to work in a specific environment, keeping in mind, like Paul said earlier, each environment, and I think you mentioned it too, each environment is unique to itself. So how do you deploy whatever this new technology is in your unique space, and how does it help you solve either a problem that's not being addressed to your satisfaction currently, or an area where there is an identifiable void that this technology helps you solve.
Okay, excellent. All right, so we're going to go to the last question, which I think is a really good question to close us out on. So thanks, Anthony from CCLU, to asking this question. So we're going to start with you, Paul. What is the coolest and the most interesting technology you've seen or see nowadays?
Wow, that's a really good question.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
You know, are you talking about in the law enforcement world, or where are you talking about?
I think I'd say let's go with the security world. Let's stick to that and say, what is the coolest technology, you know what I mean, that you've seen?
I mean, you know, I think some of the things we spoke about today are right on target with it. You know, whether we're looking at the mass notification pieces, the infrared ability to look, you know, through walls, the ability to locate where a shooter is in a building, to be able to know where people are in a building when an emergency happens. All these are life-saving technologies that are out there today that just blow my mind when you think about where we came from. I've been in this business 40 yeyears, and for me, it's night and day. And if you had told me 40 years ago we would have this technology, you know, I would say you were crazy. So it's great to still be here doing this. I think my fellow brothers and sisters in law enforcement cannot tell all of the technology experts that are out there today and the businesses that are on this webinar how grateful we are for what you do. So let me be the one to speak for law enforcement to say thank you for what you do. We couldn't do what we do without you. We do appreciate it. And for me, like I said, I think it's just those safety measures, all these new technologies that prevent officers from being put into harm's way and help our community members stay safe are just fantastic.
Awesome. Excellent. Well said. All right, Chuck, let's go to you. What's the coolest thing you've seen?
So obviously, I agree with Paul on the network, you know, mass communications systems, just the way they've evolved, and really the way it allows managers to manage during a crisis. But I will focus on the amazing work and evolution of the overall network analytics. And how it's able to pull in kind of that one-stop shopping I was talking about earlier, the way it's able to pull in so many different systems like your shooter detection systems and the way it's able to focus on, you know, there are some systems that can let you know if you've got a train station nearby that you're worried about, you know, in close proximity to your location. They can be programmed to let you know every time the train pulls up. Or if you're on a waterway and you're concerned about the water, it can let you know when a boat pulls up to the shore. It can obviously help keep people out from locations that you want to keep out and let people in. And there's also been just a great evolution of prevention of piggybacking. Where, you know, this will go back to the access control where you have an authorized person that's coming through a door and somebody attempts to trail them into a location, and it can actually alert onto that. So really, the network analytics programs are really pulling in your facial recognition, your shooter detection, your concealed weapons detection, and it's really serving as almost your universal alert system to threats and hazards that you want to receive notification about.
Okay, no, excellent, excellent. So with that, I know that we've run out of time, but gentlemen, excellent feedback. Thank you so much for your insight. Really very, very valuable. And I think the key of this all comes down to communication. Communication is key. Regardless of the technology that's being used, the communication surrounding it is definitely something that is the most valuable, whether it's in education or whether it's in basically speaking with the community or with employees. So thank you so much. Any last closing statements from each of you?
For me,
yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Chuck. No, after you, sir.
Yeah, no, let me, Paul hit on it, and thank you to everybody that's on here for what you do in the technology space. I mean, I think it's one of the things that I love the most about working in this space, as Paul hit on, and that is the challenges that you bring to guys like us, and on a daily basis about these new technologies to help solve these complex problems. And if you all weren't working as hard as you do each and every day, we would kind of be remaining stagnant in this space. And I could tell you, the good news is we're far from it. And as the evolution of challenges and threats changes each and every day rapidly, it's good to have folks like you working on extraordinary technologies to help us solve these problems. So thank you.
Thanks so much,
for
Chuck.
me,
Paul?
And I'll just echo, Chuck, what you said. And, when you take a look at law enforcement today, we have almost 900,000 law enforcement officers in the United States alone. There's 18,000 police agencies. Each person every day goes out there to help their community stay safe. And I will tell you, what you do in the technology industry really helps us do our job. And we are forever grateful for that. The men and women of law enforcement want to do the best we can do. We have some great people in technology ourselves, but we need our technology partners really to keep us moving, to be innovative, and to find better solutions each and every day. And I will tell you, we support you 100%. And I just want to say thank you.
All right. Thank you to everybody attending. Thank you so much to both of you. Have a great day and stay safe out there. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.